we touched on IP a little bit, and as getting to the end of this particular interview, I want to really, if you can just demystify the concept of IP for us a little bit, and then just what are some of the top IP considerations after demystifying it that startups should consider broadly, especially tech startups as we work with often.
I think in my journey with these things, the whole world around intellectual property has probably been one of the more complex things I've come across, and it's because it's not bricks and mortar. You can't touch it, and then the legislation and the pieces of workarounds become very tricky. I have, for example, learned the danger in referring to this body of things as intellectual property, because every bit in it seems to be dealt with differently.
Yes.
And if you have a very broad view and you want to capture it all and say, this is how I look at IP, that's very dangerous. In the olden days, people thought of intellectual property as patents.
Yes.
It's the typical patent thing. You can register it. It protects you. But the world has moved on so far from that. The broader thing, just your trade name, your domain name that you register for your website, your logos, of course the code in your particular piece of technology.
Yes.
But Catherine, then there are other things that's protectable by law and that's got a value, and that is customer relationships. Your customer database is part of your intellectual property.
Yes.
Your know-how of how to do things is part of your intellectual property. So, for example, if you're a South African business that has come to the conclusion to say, I need to externalize my intellectual properties for a potential exit that I'm lining up. The hard part of all of this is it's more often than not something you can do overnight. It needs to be a journey, and you need to be sensitive enough that each of the elements in that journey has probably got a slightly different way of how you need to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then if you completely zoom out of it, and this is going to be very boring for a lot of people on this call, but IFRS, accounting standards, when you buy a business, you actually need to break it up into the goodwill part, and you need to break it up into intellectual property part.
Yeah.
And then when you break it up into the intellectual property part, all of these things that I've mentioned, someone has to go and sit and do future discount cash flow calculations about each one of these elements. And it just speaks to it that it's become so real. And then the normal journey, Catherine, is that people tend to think, I need to spend the money and I need to register my intellectual property. My trade name, my bits and pieces of things, I need to register. And that is often true.
Yeah.
But what I've learned, there's another truth out there. The truth out there is if you put something in the public domain in the right way, then nobody can take it away from you or claim it's theirs because it's already in the public domain. What am I saying with this? I've come up with a wonderful widget and I now want to launch it in Germany.
Yeah.
There's some clever German who's sitting there and saying, I thought of this first. Now you're infringing on my intellectual property. But if, for example, you published your bit of work in some international magazine, it's now part of the public domain. There's a date link to it. There's a reference point. So Mr. German who wants to attack you is going to have to say, well, okay, I also had an opinion piece, but mine was 2 days before yours. And that's normally where it falls flat. So there's a protective intellectual property strategy that you need to have, but then also a defensive one.
Yes. Yes.
And this is one of the parts of a small business where it is so valuable to spend the money and to to sit with the right intellectual property lawyer and develop your intellectual property strategy for 2 hours. Because that's the roadmap then of your business. Then you know what to do.
I really like how you just put that and say, plan for it. It is a journey, but sit down, spend a bit of money, pay the 2-3 hours, get that journey planned out. And then this point that you've raised, that find the ways of doing things, like if it's in the public domain, to protect, etc., etc. So it really is about entrepreneurs really getting themselves quite informed on what is available, and then start planning and then follow a journey over